Welcome to another Shatterline weapon guide, where today we will dive into the most important stats, attachments, and builds for the tier 1 shotgun, the Tac Berlington. So let's get right into it. Starting off, as always, let's look at this weapon's rate of fire. For the tier 1 shotgun, we have a rate of fire of 125 rounds per minute, which is fairly slow. Matter of fact, the second slowest out of all the shotguns. But in my opinion, for pump shotgun, this is a really fast RPM. Next up, we've got damage, and this one was a really tough one for me to come up with a method to display shotgun damage to you guys, because we have no information on how much damage each pellet actually does, so it's a bit tough to address. But at the end of the day, even if we did know how much damage each pellet did, it'd still be hard to get a good idea of this weapon's damage potential. So what I have done is I ran damage experiments meter by meter over 20 times for each meter to be able to tell you guys at what ranges can you constantly and consistently one-shot kill, or at which range can you two-shot kill or three-shot kill, and so forth with the shotguns. So essentially, I went on to find out the exact ranges for you guys. Starting off with the one-shot kill range, we've got from 0 to 8 meters. Anything 8 meters or closer is a direct one-shot kill if your crosshair is on top of your target. Again, I ran these over 20 times each meter, and for anything below 8 meters, it was a 100% kill rate with only one shot. And this on your screen is what 8 meters looks like. Next up, we've got the two-shot kill range, which goes up from 9 to 10 meters. At this range, I was getting roughly 90% of the times a two-shot kill, with the occasional three-shot kills at the 10th meter. And this is what 10 meters looks like. Then we've got the 3-shot kill range, which is the 11th and the 12th meter. This was a 100% 3-shot kill range, and anything above that, the damage started dropping off hard. This is what 12 meters looks like for reference. And anything further than this range, the damage was really weak and not worth talking about. For the shotgun specifically, I also want to address the max ranges, which for this shotgun is of 25 meters, meaning that at 26 meters or further, you don't even get hit markers. So in long distance battles, you shouldn't even attempt to take a shot at your enemy. And for reference, once again, this is what 25 meters looks like. And up next, let's see how this weapon's hipfire spread compares with the other shotguns. And as you can see, the Tac Berlington ties for best hipfire spread with the M2 Tactical SAS, making those two the most accurate hipfire shotguns in the game. Now on to Recoil. For shotguns, this isn't really something we pay too much attention to, but I figured I'd still show you what the recoil for this weapon looks like if you spam it at this range. And I learned one huge important piece of information. I was always under the impression that if you aim down sight, the bullet spread would be smaller somehow, but this is not the case in this game. You have no reason to aim down sight if you're using the iron sight with the shotgun. There are no benefits for doing that, as you can see shown in these clips. And now, as for handling of this weapon, starting off for the aim down sight time, we're looking at 200 milliseconds, which is the exact same for all shotguns. And for reloading, we're looking at a reload time of 4.2 seconds for all 6 shells. That's a reload time of 0.7 seconds, or that is 700 milliseconds for each shell. And if you're to take the other shotguns into consideration, this reload time of 700 milliseconds per shell is actually the second slowest in the list. As far as sprint to fire time goes, I was getting 133 milliseconds with this weapon, even though I was fully convinced that every weapon in the game had the same sprint to fire. So I'm still intrigued by the stat in this game and wondering if we'll see any other changes with the other weapons. For base move speed, as always, we've got 6.6 meters per second. But with the ADS move speed for this weapon, we're looking at 2.57 meters per second across all shotguns, which is faster than assault rifles but slower than sidearms. And finally, for base stats, we've got our magazine capacity, which for the tier 1 shotgun is 6 shot, which is tied for the least amount of bullets with the tier 2 shotgun. And now, let's get down to attachments and modifications. For mods, this shotgun has got 2 of them, and we'll go ahead and start with those. First up, there's the legendary spiderweb that allows shots to pierce through enemies. Personally, I find this mod to be a little bit too situational for my taste, and you'll very rarely feel its impact throughout both PvP and PvE. Then we've got the Wild West modification that adds an extra pellet to each shot. This means that now, instead of shooting 10 pellets, we shoot 11 now. And with that being said, you could almost argue that this mod is a 10% damage increase, seeing how it also increases pellets shot by 10%. Personally, for both PvP and PvE, this is a much better option. Now on to attachments. Let's address some of the more niche attachments and see what they do. First, I want to address all sights for this shotgun. I think they are all bad and unnecessary. Using sights doesn't really help pellet scattering, as we mentioned earlier. There are some that helps a tiny bit, but the difference is so small and totally not worth it. There are much better options out there. I would not recommend using any of the sights for this weapon. So we've got the G12 IT, which is the extended magazine attachment. And at first glance, the trade-off doesn't seem very bad. 3 shells more for only a 10% reload decrease doesn't sound all too bad. But it actually is a pretty bad option when you use it in the field. This brings your reload up to a total of 6.9 seconds, and taking almost 7 seconds just to reload your weapon is a terrible thing to have to deal with when you're out there in the middle of the shit. Personally, I am super against the use of this attachment. And onto the good stuff, we've got the Holdex attachment, which will decrease our reload time from 4.2 seconds to 3.2 seconds for all 6 shells, which means that brings our 700 milliseconds reload per shell down to 533 milliseconds. And that goes a long way when you're in the middle of a gunfight in both PvP and PvE. Then we've got the choker, which increases accuracy by 10%. What accuracy means in shotguns in Shatterline is the more accurate the shotgun, the closer the pellets are to one another. And by the pellets being closer to each other, this would make this weapon much more deadly. And you could argue that it can make this shotgun better at slightly longer ranges as well. And lastly, for niche attachments, we've got the pump action spring, which increases pump action speed by 15% for 5 seconds after a kill. I've gone on ahead and tested this to see how much this would increase our RPM, and I've gone on to find out that this speed boost will increase this shotgun's RPM from 125 rounds per minute to 145 rounds per minute, which is a pretty significant increase in my opinion. Finally, let's move on to my personal best go-to builds for both PvP and PvE. Starting off with my PvE build, I love to use the pump action spring. That RPM increase makes dealing with waves much easier and will allow you to dish out so much more damage so much faster. I think it's a no-brainer pick for PvE and should always be included in your builds. I also like to use the choker to decrease that pellet spread and allow me to be more accurate when dealing with enemies with weak points like the adamant or the gardener. It allows it to perform a lot better against those elite monsters. And lastly, for attachments, I use the Holdex, which is extremely important in PvE as you'll be needing to reload so often in PvE due to the massive amounts of enemies you're dealing with, once again enabling you to dish out much more damage in less time. And as for the modification, as I mentioned earlier, I use the Tac Wild West. I like the flat pellet increase, which is essentially a flat damage increase, which will of course allow me to delete monsters a little bit faster. The spiderweb mod is a bit more situational, whereas the Wild West is just so much more consistent. And as for my PvP build, I mostly only change out one attachment. I still like to use the Holdex to allow me to stay in the fight, top off on bullets more easily, and I also still use the choker, making it a tad bit easier to get kills with the shotgun at different ranges. I do, however, swap out the pump action spring, as in PvP I find it to be very situational and I'd prefer something that consistently improves my weapons at all times. So for the third attachment, I use the R-pad for its 25% improved stability, which for shotguns, stability means how easy your recoil is to control, and a 25% recoil control improvement is not something I pass up on for PvP. once again making it even easier to get kills with. And as for modifications, once again I use the Wild West. As I said before, the spider web is really situational, whereas the Wild West is a much more flat out improvement all around. Now remember, if you want to learn more about Shatterline, show some love to your boy by hitting that subscribe button. Thank you guys very much for watching, much love, and catch you next time.